to build structures of accountability, both within and outside of legal institutions. I urge everyone to check out our website, sanctionstribunal.org, to view all of our past hearings. And I'm really proud to be introducing the second part of our Cuba hearing today. Part one, which took place yesterday, brought together an impressive array of expert witnesses, including Cuba's Deputy Permanent Representative at the Permanent Mission of Cuba to the UN, prominent jurists, and solidarity organizers who presented an incisive and comprehensive overview of the history, political context, and devastating impact of the imperialist blockade on the people of Cuba, as well as its role in facilitating wealth drain, undermining development, and reproducing neocolonial polarized relations between Cuba and the capitalist core countries to the benefit of US monopoly capital. Ambassador Gala Lopez cited the surprisingly candid 1960 memo by US Undersecretary of State Lester D. Mallory, stating the purpose of the blockade is to, quote, decrease monetary and real wages to bring about hunger, desperation, and overthrow of government. Yet in yesterday's hearing, we also heard about the ways the blockade is being resisted and why Cuba continues to stand, as one of our witnesses yesterday put it, as a beacon of hope for so many people across the globe, as evidenced by the resilience of the Cuban people who continue to pursue the socialist revolution through a people-centered development model and internationalism that promotes peace, health, and liberation, and which stands in stark contrast to the inhumane, racist, violent, and profit-centered model of US imperialist capitalism. Today, we will be hearing from an equally impressive group of expert witnesses, many of whom we had the honor to meet in person during our fact-finding mission to Cuba that Suzanne Adeli discussed in her introduction yesterday. They will hone in more closely on the impact of the imperialist blockade on specific sectors, including technology, public health, and workers, as well as agriculture. As Suzanne explained yesterday, the harsh measures of the blockade have created many obstacles for our Cuban comrades to be able to collaborate with us, including the inability to connect via Zoom, which is why we are using the Jitsi Meet platform today, and we'll have a combination of pre-recorded presentations as well as live witness testimony. The circumstances of the blockade make it so that we may face some technical difficulties, so please bear with us and be patient if that occurs. Today's public audience will be joining us through a live stream being hosted on YouTube. If you should have any questions, we may be able to read them in the comments. However, we will be prioritizing questions from today's jurors, who will be introduced shortly. I want to thank all of our expert witnesses again, from both yesterday and today. Again, also all of our comrades at ICAP, especially Leima Martinez Freire and Aileen Lesmes Bonachea, our amazing translators, Jill Clark Golub and Giselle Perdomo, Charlotte Cates, who is also on the steering committee and is providing amazing technical assistance as always today, Suzanne Adeli and Matt Almonte, who are also part of the steering committee and will be co-moderators for today's hearing. And of course, our two co-chairs of the tribunal who are with us today, Nina Farnia and Helia Dutagri. Finally, I would like to thank our wonderful jurors with us here today, including Marjorie Cohen, Eva Nanopoulos, Victor Good, Michael Deutsch, Professors Prabhat Patnaik and Mohammed Tay. I will now pass to Suzanne Adeli, President of the National Lawyers Guild, who will be introducing our speakers.
Thank you, Karina, and thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you for day 2 of the Cuba hearing, and welcome again to our comrades in Havana. It's my pleasure to introduce our first witness for today, Yarina Amoroso. Yarina is assistant professor at the Center for Electronic Governance, University of Informatics Sciences in Havana. She is the scientific leader of the Legal Informatics Research Group and president of the Cuban Society of Law and Informatics at the National Union of Jurists of Cuba. Yarina, welcome, and we look forward to hearing your presentation. Can our comrades in at the ICAP office, can you hear us?
Yes, good morning to.
Oh, okay.
Good morning. The speech of Professor, although she's here, the speech is in a video. Anyway, she is here to make any comments or answering any question.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I think I will look in the drive. If we have the video, I will pull it up right now. So just to explain, we have we have several videos that we're going to be playing today. Two of them, and two of them are from different ministries that ICAP will introduce, and a few of them are from the witnesses who are also present with us today. And we will play the video recordings of their presentations, but they will be available to join the Q&A and discussion after the videos are played. So I think that what we should do then, Laima Martinez, who is the North American director of the Cuban Institute of Friendship, who's with us today. Laima, can you introduce the video that we received from the Ministry of Communications? And we'll play that first while we're preparing Yarina's video.
Hi. Okay. Well, as we have been mentioning, we have together with us two professors. One that Jarina, that it is here with us, and as we have been working on different sectors, I will introduce some of the work that Jarina has been doing during all this work. I'm sorry, I will read it in Spanish. Yarina es profesora auxiliar del Centro de Gobierno Electrónico. This is a center that the government has approved, and it's coordinating for moving towards the digitalization of all the processes in Cuba. This is a key ability that an important center that it is guiding each of the ministers and all the institutions in order to move towards the digital formats of the data and the information in order to take a proper decision and to help those who are making decisions. Also, Janina is, as part of the work she is doing, she works closely with the Union of Jurists in Cuba in order to put legal formats into the processes. So I think that it will be important to see the video and then to make some other comments about Janina and the work for digitalization.
Las principales afectaciones están dadas por las limitaciones de suministros de tecnologías y equipamientos producidos bajo licencia o utilizando componentes norteamericanos, lo que implica que haya que acudir a compras en otros mercados mucho más lejanos. Esto se refleja en afectaciones monetarias, financieras ocasionales.
Monetary and financial impacts caused by this are affected by fluctuations in currency, and banks are prevented from doing transaction in Cuba. The revenue that we do not perceive because of the export of telecommunications service has to take into account that foreign providers cannot issue contracts with us because of fear of sanctions. And also, this affects the production and services provided because the costs are much higher to repair equipment because it cannot be done directly with the provider or manufacturers in the United States. There is a constant risk of getting products, modules, and equipment sent out for repair to the territory of the United States being confiscated upon trying to return it to Cuba in order to avoid the confiscation of this equipment. We have contracts with third parties whose consequences is that the whole process is slowed down and it becomes more expensive to repair the equipment. It becomes twice of what it would cost if we did so directly. Providers such as Niticom and Impel have had to change their bank statements declared in the contracts because of financial pressure imposed by the United States, which has caused delays in the delivery of repaired units. The limited use of US dollars in financial transactions with US providers and operators leads to the use of other freely converted currencies that fluctuates compared to the US dollar, which continuously raises the exchange risk and can give rise to financial losses. Another aspect that has a negative impact are those associated with the high fines that have been applied on various bank banking institutions for alleged violation of U.S. legislation on the blockade imposed against our country. The effect of these measures are still felt today because there are banks that are afraid of being caught in violations of this legislation and decide to not carry out the banking transactions if they know that the funds originate from or are have as destination Cuban entities. And this situation has become worse since the inclusion of the International Financial Bank in the list of Cuban entities sanctioned by the United States government. Specific damages in the area of information and communications technologies is that it makes it impossible to access to computer tools, which are indispensable for training and producing national software. The process of software development includes an important component of access to information and also depositories to update the tools and computer techniques, which of certain technologies. We cannot access several portals from Cuba, which makes uh, it limits the possibilities of having upgrades, including for several examples. Softel is a Cuban business with experience in the health sector whose fundamental activity is the development, maintenance, and implementation and support for computer solutions. It is recognized as an institution that issues the certifications to provide digital certificates. This is vitally important to keep these updated, as well as to have tools and technology sources that make it possible to carry out this activity. This is true of other businesses and teaching centers. They have had to use the innovative capacity of Cuban specialists to find alternative solutions, which often do not meet the needs and objectives of work on the web, and they slow down and make it difficult to do development and implementation of high level services and the assimilation of state of the art technology. In addition, despite the fact that we've promoted open access software, a lot of the applications and tools and licenses are still based on proprietary software. In order to obtain access to this open source software, we need to access a website that has been banned to Cuba by the US government. Some examples of this are the major companies of the computer sector, such as Oracle, Dell, Adobe, and Borland. In fact, in order to gain access to so-called open source software, you have to do this online, and also many of these products and projects are also prohibited to Cuba as since 2010, including policies to prohibit access to Cuba and other countries on the US's blacklist. Given how impossible it is to procure parts and replacements for the equipment that we work with, and because of the high percentage of components produced by US manufacturers, this has also affect our ICT quality of services. Since we don't have the components to do repairs in the established time, and we get turned by some providers who refuse to provide support services for installed uh, technology, then this affects the television transmissions for all viewers, that is to say, all the people of Cuba. Another impact of the limited satellite services that affects Cuban ships. It is difficult to provide this service, and there are time lags which cause major losses because our navigation capacity is limited. This in turn causes delays in transporting supplies to the country and makes it more difficult to purchase and make payments overseas of technological equipment for satellite communication. Within this context, I would also like to speak about the policy of state aggression and terrorism by the United States against Cuba. In order to defend our radio spectrum, we continue to channel a lot of resources into this because the US continues to have anti-Cuban transmissions which violate international standards in terms of use of the radio spectrum set forth in the International Agreement on Radio Communications with the United States is a signatory to. They kept in place the policy of the Russian Kaspersky Lab company, which Sigormatica is the platinum distributor for more than 15 years, and that is to not market in Cuba their solutions that are to businesses that are on the Office of Foreign Assets Control list of sanctions. And so we have the website here, which provides further evidence. The current situation of the blockade makes it impossible to have access to brands and um, high delivery services and market leaders in telecommunications that are distributed by US companies, reflecting that they refuse to have contracting, do factory tests, and post-sales guarantees. We continue to be under siege in our territory, and there's pressure placed on our companies and trade relations with others who are interested in doing business in telecommunications with Cuba. This has a negative impact on allowing Cubans to have access to the adequate infrastructure required for our access to internet and digitalization during the period of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we continue to see these difficulties in participating in virtual meetings and events convened by the United Nations system, as well as other academic and business spaces, and even day-to-day communication for the Cuban people, because it is impossible to use video conferencing platforms because they're restricted to Cuba, such as Zoom and WebEx. This is a result, or rather, as a result of that, it's impossible for Cuba to participate on equal footing with the other member states of the United Nations or any other forum that may be convened over these platforms. For all of these reasons, we maintain that the blockade is hindering the technological sovereignty of Cuba and its legitimate right to development, all of which has direct and indirect impacts on the well-being and sustainable development of the Cuban people.
Michael, are you sharing your screen? Okay. There we go. Thank you. Thank you so much, Yorina, for that sort of very important testimony on the impact that the blockade has had on the development of Cuba's technology and the importance of technological sovereignty for the development of our countries. I'm going to move now to playing another video from the Ministry of Communications. And Naima, would you like to say anything about this video before I play it?
Wait. Yes, with the support of the Central Union in Cuba, we were able to visit one of the institutions where they are having and coordinating efforts for the promotion of technology and telecommunications for our society. The National Lawyers Guild was able to visit this place during the celebrations of May Day in Cuba. We have this video that will explain some of the effects that the blockade is imposing towards the development of technology and telecommunications in Cuba. So I invite all to see it. It is, fortunately, in this case, the video will have subtitles in English.
Las empresas más afectadas son las de telecomunicaciones de Cuba, seguromática y la de aplicaciones informáticas. Asimismo, sufren los efectos los grupos empresariales Correos de Cuba y de la informática y las comunicaciones, que incluye a la empresa de radiocomunicación y difusión de Cuba y Cubatel S.A.
Y financiero que impone el gobierno de los Estados Unidos contra nuestro país adquiere una nueva dimensión, que es la dimensión tecnológica, porque afecta los procesos tecnológicos que impactan directamente en el proceso de informatización de la sociedad.
Más del 95% del monto total de las
Okay. I was just told that you could not hear it, but there are subtitles, so we can just keep it playing until we figure out what the glitch is.
Se hagan más difíciles las entregas, que lleguen más tarde los equipamientos, que muchas veces llega un equipamiento y hay que esperar a que llegue el otro y no se pone directamente en funcionamiento o rápidamente en funcionamiento para que empiece a aportar las líneas que necesita el pueblo, los datos y las velocidades que necesita el pueblo.
Las empresas de tecnologías de telecomunicaciones permanecen imposibilitadas de ofrecernos equipamiento con más del 10% de componentes norteamericanos.
Tenemos que utilizar la variante de tener tarjetas fundamentalmente muy costosas guardadas en un almacén esperando a que haya una posible interrupción, pero al final todo eso genera un gasto de almacenamiento.
En el segmento de las telecomunicaciones, la Oficina de Control de Bienes Extranjeros, dependiente del Departamento del Tesoro estadounidense, impuso una multa de $1.190 millones a una compañía asiática, fabricante de uno de los equipamientos más usados en el sistema de comunicaciones de Cuba.
Asimismo, el camino hacia la exportación de servicios de telecomunicaciones está lleno de obstáculos. Esa misma suerte corre el desarrollo de las nuevas tecnologías de la información y la comunicación, el acceso a herramientas informáticas indispensables en la labor de capacitación, y la producción de contenidos de software nacionales es casi imposible. Otro de los daños se focaliza en la negativa de acceso a servicios o descarga de información, una vez que se reconoce que el enlace se realiza desde una dirección de Internet otorgada al dominio cubano.cu.
En la web, por ejemplo, la plataforma Google tiene más de 20 servicios de los que ofrece, están bloqueados de manera parcial o total para las personas que desde Cuba acceden, porque es importante explicar que no es solo para los cubanos, es para las personas que desde la red de Cuba acceden a esta información en Internet.
Para que usted tenga una idea, en las guías de usuario de los productos de Microsoft existe como mínimo un acápite que expresamente dice: ni el software, ni la documentación y la información o tecnologías subyacentes podrán descargarse o exportarse o reexportarse a Cuba o a otros países para los que Estados Unidos haya establecido embargo de bienes.
Hay otros sitios que también bloquean su información hacia Cuba, por ejemplo, la plataforma Oracle, que impacta en la posibilidad de acceder a información y herramientas para el diseño, la creación y la gestión de grandes bases de datos que son necesarias para aplicaciones con impacto fundamentalmente en temas asociados a la robótica, a la inteligencia artificial.
Estados Unidos impuso una millonaria multa al banco francés Société Générale por violar las sanciones contra Cuba. Aquí le contamos la historia.
Pagará $1.340 millones a varias entidades estadounidenses por haber violentado las sanciones que le impuso el gobierno de Washington a un grupo de países donde figura Cuba.
Las variaciones bancarias, la prohibición a los bancos de realizar transacciones con Cuba y el empleo limitado del USD en las transacciones financieras con operadores y proveedores norteamericanos provocan pérdidas considerables. Con las transmisiones anticubanas continúa la violación de las normas internacionales que rigen el uso del espectro radioeléctrico del Convenio Internacional de Radiocomunicaciones, del cual el gobierno de Estados Unidos es uno de sus países signatarios.
También se usan las redes para la proliferación de noticias falsas, y esto impacta también en la población, sobre todo en los usuarios de Internet, que están sujetos a la desinformación sobre temas puntuales. Esto es una contradicción porque a partir de la creación de la Fuerza de Tarea o el Grupo de Trabajo para el Acceso a Internet en Cuba, creado por el gobierno de los Estados Unidos bajo su actual administración, donde se dice que se va a proveer a los cubanos la facilidad del acceso a Internet y a los medios no convencionales de comunicación, bueno, por otra parte, se bloquea el acceso a los sitios de información y se bloquea la información que pueden recibir las personas, se le imponen noticias falsas, se bloquean cuentas en Internet.
A causa de las restricciones del bloqueo, los operadores postales de Israel, Bulgaria, Emiratos Árabes Unidos, Ucrania, Reino Unido, Países Bajos, Egipto y Estados Unidos no han podido realizar las transacciones financieras a Cuba correspondientes al Servicio Postal Universal.
Aún así hemos avanzado porque, por ejemplo, en los temas asociados al gobierno electrónico, en la generación de contenidos y servicios a la población, el país ha buscado estrategias para que, a pesar de todas estas afectaciones, se pueda tener un beneficio. Se han desarrollado por parte de empresas nacionales plataformas para el comercio electrónico, plataformas para el pago digital, para implementar acciones de comercio electrónico, y todo esto tiene que ver con lo que estamos implementando hoy de gobierno electrónico. Son alternativas que ha buscado no solo el Ministerio de Comunicaciones, sino todos los organismos que de conjunto con el Ministerio trabajan en el proceso de informatización, porque esto es un proceso transversal a todas las esferas económico y social del país.
El bloqueo económico, comercial y financiero de Estados Unidos impide a los cubanos desarrollarse a plena capacidad. No obstante, Cuba informatiza.
Thank you for sharing that video with us. So we've heard from the video some important information about the impact of the blockade, particularly on the communication sector. And we heard from Irina about the implications on Cuba's technology and development of technology. Now we're going to move into a couple of videos that are discussing the impact of the blockade on workers in Cuba. And I think we're going to start with a very brief video that we took of Estales Rodriguez, who is the second secretary of the Central Federation of Workers in Cuba, who we met on our recent trip to Havana. And I think that Charlotte is going to pull up that video. Is that correct, Charlotte? Uh-oh. Okay, thank you. Let me just try one time and see if it works. Okay, so somebody will be able to play that in a moment, hopefully. So we're going to move on to a video presentation from Guillermo Ferriol Molina from the National Lawyers Union. Guillermo is president of the Cuban Society of Labor Law and Social Security and a professor of labor law and social security at the Faculty of Law of the University of Havana, and a member of regional associations of labor lawyers, a speaker at national and international events, including of somebody who's been a frequent guest at the conventions of the National Lawyers Guild. So I'm going to share my video and where we have a recording of his presentation. But I'm happy to also say that Guillermo is with us today and will be available for a Q&A and discussion portion.
Buenos días, saludos a todos y a todas participantes en este importante encuentro. Agradezco en primer lugar al Gremio Nacional de Abogados de Estados Unidos la posibilidad de participar en este tribunal, en que una vez más abordaremos un tema tan sensible para los cubanos y las cubanas como es el bloqueo del gobierno de los Estados Unidos contra Cuba. Es posible que otros colegas que han participado en este encuentro hayan expuesto ya, por supuesto, elementos jurídicos y elementos prácticos. Tenemos también muchos amigos en el pueblo de Estados Unidos y sé cómo piensan sobre el bloqueo y sé cómo son como personas. El bloqueo del gobierno de Estados Unidos contra Cuba hay que apreciarlo en nuestro criterio en su integralidad, en varios escenarios o varias dimensiones, y a partir de ahí también valorar a quién afecta, a quién beneficia. Conocemos todos y todas que se inició en el año 1962, hace más de 60 años, en un momento internacional diferente, pero continúa y continúa recrudecido. Desde entonces han vivido bajo los efectos del bloqueo casi 10 o más de 10 generaciones de cubanos y cubanas, y como parte de ellos, casi el 80% de la población actual de Cuba hemos vivido bajo un gobierno de Estados Unidos que nos ha impuesto este brutal bloqueo. Pese a su existencia, a la existencia del bloqueo, en fecha reciente, en el año 2019, la población cubana votó y aprobó una constitución con más del 86% de votos válidos en un proceso de referendo popular mediante votos secretos, voluntarios y libres. Véase si hay efectos nocivos del bloqueo que puedan o no afectar. Seguimos aquí, pese a todo lo que se diga. Decía que hay que valorar varios escenarios o dimensiones. El bloqueo, como conocemos desde el punto de vista jurídico, afecta el derecho internacional, afecta la igualdad entre los pueblos, afecta el derecho a la libre determinación, a la no intervención de un Estado en los asuntos de otro, afecta el respeto a la independencia, a la libre determinación, además de violar de forma masiva y flagrante los derechos humanos de los cubanos. Veamos algunos detalles. Elementos jurídicos y valoraremos elementos prácticos. En la dimensión nacional afecta que Cuba pueda obtener ingresos que ha dejado de percibir por concepto de exportaciones de servicios, exportaciones de mercancías. Nos afecta también por pérdidas, porque la necesidad de reubicación geográfica de nuestro mercado, por el deterioro de la producción, de los servicios, escasez de alimentos, de combustible, porque no hay posibilidad de obtenerlo en un mercado tan cercano como el de Estados Unidos. Ejemplos hay muchos. Y aquí siempre rememoro, y a veces la historia nos da la razón. Por ejemplo, en el siglo pasado, en los años 90 del siglo pasado, el momento en que la economía cubana se dificultó grandemente por la desaparición del campo socialista, el gobierno de Estados Unidos, vecino cercano, lejos de ayudar o contribuir a la solución de los problemas, aprobó leyes que contrajeron drásticamente aún más la presión económica sobre nuestro país. Desde entonces, barcos que toquen puerto cubano no pueden entrar al puerto de Estados Unidos. Y eso ¿qué hace esto? Que se encarezca el comercio exterior, pues la mayoría de los insumos, materias primas, bienes deben transportarse desde mercados lejanos y muchas
materials have to be sold in distant countries and often landing in third-party countries. And that makes all of our purchases and sales more expensive. And this is based on a law approved in the 1990s by the government of the United States. If we link this to the fact that the country does not have access to financing from international organizations, we see that the economic and financial situation is even more severe. Together with this, I must mention the more recent measures, such as limiting the sending of remittances and the ban on tourism trips and scientific and medical exchanges. And all of this affects our human rights and the rights of the Cuban people to decide on how to meet their own needs. There's another element that I would like to add. And given the limitations on bringing supplies into the countries today, the Cubans are feeling the impact of this policy that the international community has been condemning for more than 20 years. We feel this, and we have felt this in our transportation to work on a day-to-day basis, and when the lack of raw materials and supplies prevent us from doing day-to-day activities and transport. And we have also seen on more and one occasion the impacts of this. We have to add to this that more than 22% of the Cuban population today is over 60 years of age. And the aging of the population means that we need care and medicines for this age group, and even support for some people in order for these people over age 60 to have a better quality of life. But the embargo and the limitations of the blockade means that we do not always have the possibility to get these supplies, and it has a serious impact on the quality of life of senior citizens. In our country today, approximately 30% of the economy is in the private sector. And these Cuban business persons need supplies, investment, access to international markets, new knowledge, but all of this is limited by the blockade. Just a few days ago, to give you an example, an owner of one of these small private businesses requested our advice when they were trying to procure technology from the United States, from a nearby neighbor, but had components from the United States, and so the business deal got frozen. These impacts have affect everyone in Cuba, regardless of any distinction as to political orientation. Another one is how there are third-party countries that cannot do business with us. So this is collateral damage, of including Cuba on the list of state sponsors of terrorism. This is a violation of the principle of self-determination, respect for self-determination of states, and extraterritorial enforcement of domestic law in other countries that are not part of the dispute. It prevents Cuba from having access to products, services, and financing from third parties and regular economic relationships, as occurs with any other countries. In Cuba, there is a whole set of products and services that could help improve education, health, and technology, and the lives of citizens in these other countries. But because of this embargo, they cannot have access to this. And we have become aware, for example, of a method for teaching reading, which has been approved by many countries. It's called the Cuban method, but many countries cannot have access to it because of these limitations. Also, internationally speaking, we wonder whether or not there is respect for the right of third parties, because this blockade continues to be in place after more than 190 countries have been voting against it. Another thing we should mention is a little bit different from what is normally done. How does this policy affect the population of the United States? It limits their ability to travel to Cuba for tourism or to exchange scientific and technical knowledge. For example, more than 30,000 people in the United States have had to have a lower limb amputated because of diabetes. That is a human cost that is unacceptable, because in Cuba, we have the medication to avoid this procedure, and it's just a 30-minute flight away. This is, without a doubt, a policy that does impact the population of the United States. There are other elements. People in the United States are part of the Cuban community that want to maintain ties with their relatives in Cuba, but often they cannot take care of their relatives in Cuba, and many of them are over 60 years of age and even older than that. The blockade must be eliminated for the sake of life. I know that because there are so many laws that uphold this, the process of turning back the blockade may take time, but there could be executive orders to limit the nefarious effects of this policy against the Cuban people, and there's already evidence of this that we saw during the Obama administration. We also see that during previous periods, we knew several friends amongst the people of the United States, and we have studied with them the legal system of that country. We have established relationships with attorneys and friends in that country, and if uh, we're thinking not just of the future, but today. There are people in the United States who marry people living in Cuba, and sometimes this marriage should not continue. But how can you dissolve a marriage with the limitations that exist? There are also people who have died in the United States, and we've seen this, who leave their inheritance to people who live in Cuba. What can we do about that? There are people in the United States who want to establish trade relations with Cuban businesses, but they're limited. There are also U.S. families that want to um, improve the health of some of their family members on the other side of the Gulf of Mexico, but they can't come to Cuba. And the same is true going in the other direction. So is there really reason to any justification to continue the blockade? More than 11 million Cubans for over 60 years have been impacted by a policy that selectively applies the laws of the United States on Cuba. There are thousands of people in the United States who would like to come and visit our island, and people who have a lot in common with us: music, jazz, reggaeton, son, sports, baseball, and people in the MBA, but there are also other elements such as our character and friendship that we've been able to establish with our friends in the United States. In our view, there is more that unites us than separates us. What separates us? What limits our closeness? It is the blockade, which must be eliminated. Once again, thank you for listening to me, and I look forward to having an exchange of views with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for making that video available to us. It was a very important and comprehensive presentation on the impact of the blockade on many of the sectors that workers rely on, and its impact on local production, as well as the extraterritorial dimensions of the blockade, which is something that was brought up to us several times during our fact-finding mission. And I do appreciate what the line that Guillermo gave, that the blockade must be eliminated for the sake of life. So I'm going to now ask my colleagues, I think that they have the CTC video prepared, right? This is a short clip from the second secretary of the Central Federation of Workers in Cuba, making some comments about the blockade. And I think either Charlotte or...
El bloqueo de los Estados Unidos cada día arrecia más al pueblo de Cuba. Y tener presente que es al pueblo de Cuba, no como ellos piensan que es al gobierno de Cuba, sino al pueblo
Who
de
are
Cuba.
suffering that blockade, all of the people of Cuba, even more so the workers, because we are the protagonists trying to move forward our social and model. There's a set of activities, however, that are operating at a very low level in terms of production, because the blockade does not allow raw materials to come in, it does not allow...
grupo de equipo que nos hace falta en cada una de las instituciones médicas nuestras, en los hospitales, y por ser de los Estados Unidos no nos permiten que entren acá, y eso lo sufre todos los días el pueblo cubano, pero un pueblo que resiste, un pueblo que lucha, un pueblo victorioso, un pueblo que estamos todos los días trabajando por seguir adelante, pero también tenemos que nosotros, a todo el mundo, denunciar ese cruel bloqueo que tenemos. Sobre todo también el tema de la biotecnología, muy afectado el tema de los medicamentos, de cómo verdaderamente nuestros laboratorios, nuestras fábricas pueden desarrollar todo lo que le hace falta al pueblo. Y por sobre todas las cosas, de cómo todos los días nos siguen incorporando, ahora nos incorporaron en la lista de los patrocinadores del terrorismo, cuando el pueblo de Cuba, solidario con todo el mundo, humanista con todo el mundo, jamás hemos tenido un acto de terrorista. Todo lo contrario, lo que hemos sufrido es acto de terrorista de los Estados Unidos. Pero los trabajadores, verdad que sufren ese bloqueo, que hay niveles que impactan muchísimo, que disminuyen nuestros niveles de actividad, pero por sobre todas las cosas siempre seguimos laborando.
Muchas gracias, Charlotte. Creo que ahora vamos a tocar el...
with the English subtitles. I think, Karina, you're going to upload that? Are you able to do that, Karina?
Sorry. I'm trying to, I have it on my screen, but I can't see where it comes up in the shared. I mean, I'm going to, because it's like a downloaded file, I'm really sorry. I'm just not able to find it. Let me see, entire screen. Maybe I can, if I just share from window.
Let me do it now, Karina. I think I was able to take
Okay. Can you see this or no?
No, we can't.
Okay.
I was able to put it in my drive, so I'm gonna try and play it now.
Okay.
Los Estados Unidos cada día arrecia más al pueblo de Cuba. Y tener presente que es al pueblo de Cuba, no como ellos piensan que es al gobierno de Cuba, sino al pueblo de Cuba, porque todos los del pueblo de Cuba sufrimos de ese bloqueo. Y más los trabajadores, que somos protagonistas de cómo se va desarrollando nuestro modelo económico y social. Sin embargo, tenemos un grupo de actividades que hoy están en muy bajos niveles de producción para lograr eficiencia a partir de que el bloqueo no permite la entrada de materias primas, no permite importar un grupo de materias primas. De los sectores más afectados nuestros se llama la salud. Y sin embargo tenemos un grupo de medicamentos, tendremos un grupo de equipos que nos hace falta en cada una de las instituciones médicas nuestras, en los hospitales, y por ser de los Estados Unidos no nos permiten que entren acá, y eso lo sufre todos los días el pueblo cubano, pero un pueblo que resiste, un pueblo que lucha, un pueblo victorioso, un pueblo que estamos todos los días trabajando por seguir adelante, pero también tenemos que nosotros, a todo el mundo, denunciar ese cruel bloqueo que tenemos. Sobre todo también el tema de la biotecnología, muy afectado el tema de los medicamentos, de cómo verdaderamente nuestros laboratorios, nuestras fábricas pueden desarrollar todo lo que le hace falta al pueblo. Y por sobre todas las cosas, de cómo todos los días nos siguen incorporando, ahora nos incorporaron en la lista de los patrocinadores del terrorismo, cuando el pueblo de Cuba, solidario con todo el mundo, humanista con todo el mundo, jamás hemos tenido un acto de terrorista. Todo lo contrario, lo que hemos sufrido es acto de terrorista de los Estados Unidos. Pero los trabajadores, verdad que sufren ese bloqueo, que hay niveles que impactan muchísimo, que disminuyen nuestros niveles de actividad, pero por sobre todas las cosas siempre seguimos laborando.
Okay. So, we've heard several testimonies today on the impacts of the blockade on various sectors, technology, science, its impact on Cuba's ability to produce, and their communication sector, transportation, and these are sort of the importance of those impacts. As we're hearing, are not just because sort of they impact and create burden on the daily lives of workers and others in Cuba and in other countries, but they also serve to undermine the sovereignty of Cuba. And another area, another sector in which we have learned a great deal while we were in Cuba, but also we learned a great deal in several of the other hearings the tribunal have heard, is the impact and food sovereignty of nations. And we were hoping to have somebody join us live to talk about that, but instead we actually have a video that was shared with us from the Ministry of Agriculture. And I invite our friends at ICAP to quickly introduce that video while I upload it.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, the video we are going to present today, first we'll have subtitles, so it will be easier for friends to understand. And second, we will have two representatives from the agricultural sector in Cuba. The first one, it is Fernando Ravelo. He is from the Agricultural Production Cooperative in Artemisa. And the second one is Rolando Gonzalez from a cooperative here in Havana. This is a video that we recorded some some weeks ago as part of a program that we transmit monthly in our website Siempre con Cuba here at ICA, and we dedicated one of those programs to the effects of the blockade on the agriculture. So I would like to highlight that the losses for not being able to exchange and trade normally our products, our agricultural products in Cuba, and not being able to get access to technology and other services. Cuba lost only in the period of 2021 up to 2022, the losses were $270 million just for this specific sector of the agriculture. And there are difficulties for the system of cooperatives in Cuba to exchange with other cooperatives, not only with the United States, that usually we mention that it is the closest market that we have, but there are serious difficulties when our farmers and when our agricultural sector is trying to sell products to other countries. So I invite you to see the video, and I will go back to make some other comments.
El 27 de septiembre del año 1981, está ubicada en el municipio de Alquiza, provincia de Artemisa. Es una cooperativa dedicada a los cultivos varios. Tenemos 151 socios y 246 hectáreas. Una cooperativa que producimos alrededor de 4.000 toneladas al año de viandas, vegetales, hortalizas, granos y frutales. Pero bueno, pudiéramos quizás producir casi que duplicar estas producciones si no fuera por los efectos que tenemos impuestos por el bloqueo económico y financiero de los Estados Unidos en nuestro país. Realmente nosotros hemos atravesado por momentos muy difíciles con la adquisición de insumos para producir, los lubricantes, los combustibles, las piezas de repuesto. Que de no existir el bloqueo, pudiéramos estar hablando hoy de una cooperativa quizás con 8.000 toneladas de viandas, vegetales, hortalizas y granos y frutales, y así fuera a nivel de nuestro país, las demás cooperativas y las más productivas que tenemos, que disposición de trabajar hay, voluntad hay. Lo que pasa es que nos escasean mucho los recursos, pero aún así no nos vamos a detener. Vamos a seguir produciendo para el pueblo en cualquier circunstancia.
Bueno, Rolando Corrales Benítez, campesino de la cooperativa Aide Santa María Cuadrado, de Boyero, en La Habana, miembro de su junta directiva no profesional y miembro del Comité Nacional de la ANA. Quiero en primer lugar hacer una denuncia muy fuerte contra el bloqueo inhumano, brutal, injusto que el gobierno de los Estados Unidos mantiene sobre nuestro país durante más de 60 años por el único delito de querer ser libre y soberano, sometiendo a penuria a un pueblo que quiere rendir por hambre y por necesidad. Realmente algo que afecta a todos los sectores de la economía del país y en particular a nosotros los campesinos, porque realmente hemos dejado de percibir tecnología, insumos muy fundamental para la producción de alimentos, algo que es fundamental para la vida de las personas. Realmente nosotros hemos tenido que ingeniárnosla y meter el pecho, como dice uno en buen cubano, para lograr mantener estándares de alimentación del pueblo realmente adecuados, buscando alternativas como son la producción de abonos orgánicos, humo de lombriz, cercas vivas, rotando cultivos, varias prácticas agroecológicas que hoy implementamos con recursos propios de nuestra finca, implementación de sistemas agroecológicos integrados en nuestra finca, que realmente nos ha permitido lograr que no retroceder ni un paso atrás en el empeño de lograr que nuestro país sea un país próspero y sostenible y realmente sea independiente en la esfera agroalimentaria. Decirles también que lo aprovechamos todo, lo que tenemos al alcance de la mano. Esto ellos han apretado, nosotros realmente hemos apretado más porque nos ha enseñado a aprovechar, a saber la capacidad que ha desarrollado la revolución en nuestro pueblo. La capacidad cultural, la capacidad científica que usted la tiene desde los institutos de investigación con los cuales tenemos relaciones de trabajo hasta los campesinos, que hoy usted consigue un campesino que es ingeniero agrónomo, es veterinario, es ingeniero mecánico, porque la revolución ha sembrado educación en todo su pueblo de manera gratuita. Y esto es una fortaleza que tenemos junto a la unidad del pueblo, que es otra gran fortaleza que tenemos y que estamos convencidos que vamos a salir adelante y que ese bloqueo que es inhumano, que es cruel, que es inmoral, no nos va a derrotar ni nos va a poner de rodillas. Realmente el compromiso de todos los campesinos es seguir produciendo para nuestra familia y para el pueblo, seguir avanzando. No vamos a renunciar jamás al desarrollo, a producir para nuestro pueblo, que es la principal tarea, la principal meta que tenemos, y realmente seguir denunciando porque nos hace daño este bloqueo. Realmente si no estuviera ese bloqueo, las posibilidades de producción fueran aún mayores. El acceso a tecnología nos garantizaría mejores resultados productivos, más baratos. Realmente es algo que nos hace un daño enorme, pero nosotros seguiremos denunciando ese bloqueo criminal, pero denunciándolo, produciendo más y siendo más solidarios y haciendo donaciones. Nosotros atendemos círculos infantiles, escuelas, hospitales, y no vamos a renunciar a eso también, aparte del consumo del pueblo. Y lo vamos a seguir hoy más firme que nunca al lado de la revolución y con la memoria realmente de los que nos trajeron hasta aquí, nuestros padres que hicieron esta revolución y lo dieron todo por el pueblo. Y todas estas alternativas y muchas más que quizás ahora no menciono, pero que realmente existen, es lo que nos ha permitido resistir. Y no solamente resistir, vamos a vencer y vamos a seguir venciendo. Es lo que es la cocina de nuestro pueblo.
Thank you for, can you hear me? I'm trying to put the mic here.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So thank you for presenting this video, and I wanted to make some other comments after this, because as you could see, our farmers are very committed to keep overcoming all the obstacles of that the blockade imposed to them. I wanted to explain that the comrades from the agricultural sector in Cuba were not able to come today as we were planning, because right now the Farmers Association, the Ministry of Agriculture, and other entities of this specific sector are focused on the situation that is happening right now in the eastern provinces of Cuba. As I'm sure that all our friends are aware of the heavy rains that have provoked severe damages in our territory, and the authorities and the agricultural sector is very focused on going there to recover as much as possible, because there are a lot of areas that has been flooded due to this rain, and some of the crops that were about to be harvested are going to be affected. So this is something that Cuba is facing, not only the effects of the blockade, but also the climate change and also these weather situations. But the difficulties of the blockade are specifically in the needs that Cuba has to get ready for these situations. with the weather. And I have to mention some of the elements that for many years our farmers and the specialists in agriculture has been calling attention on. One of those is that it is very difficult for Cuba to fulfill the goals and objectives for the sustainable agenda that the United Nations has approved for all the countries. In these specific goals, it is the commitment, or all states should make the commitment to guarantee the food and supplies for their population. In the case of Cuba, the state and the government are committed to fulfill this goal, but the truth is that it is very difficult due to some conditions that are not allowing us to fulfill it. One, it is related to some of the things that we were sharing yesterday and today, and it is the how the supplies of fuel and oil are blocked for Cuba, with more intensification in the last month. As you know, the agricultural sector needs this fuel to prepare the land, need those fuel to move the products from one place to the other. They need also the transportation to move the specific materials, the seeds, I mean, all those things that are needed to for the crops and for finally harvest their products. Another difficulty has to do with the technological difficulties to access new technology. As you know, all those who have visited Cuba, there are a lot of areas that are needing new technology to cover more land for the production. And the technological equipments are also a limitation to widen the possibilities of food production in Cuba. The other difficulties that we are facing every day, it is not to be able to access the systems of import control that has to do directly with the imports and exports of the agricultural products that needs specific authorization, phytosanitary and other related international laws that Cuba needs to follow in order to export our products. Yesterday, professor from the Jurist Union were explaining in detail the effects of the Torricelli Act. In the case of the agricultural sector, it is also a limitation not to be able to export in all the extent of our own capacity to other countries of the area and from far away. We have specific products that are of great interest, as the honeybee and the carbon that Cuba produces, and it is very difficult to place those products in the international market. Another limitation for the finances to get into, to have the development that Cuba needs in the agricultural sector, it is related to the bank system. It is almost impossible to make those transfers to Cuba or to get access to finances, to credits for the specific programs of the agricultural sector. I have to mention that thanks to some United Nations programs, Cuba have been able to, in some specific local areas, to have some productive areas in the specific the rice sector, and also in the being able to not to use pesticides but in this case to promote in all our areas the natural products for the to check on the plagues and all other situations that happens in the agricultural sector. But that is not enough. That it is specifically some programs that UNPD has with Cuba, but the truth is that there is a knowledge, there is the capacity of the Cuban farmers to look for the development, and it is needed to remove all those obstacles that are placing in the middle of the development. Some other limitations are directly impacting the health of the Cuban people, and that's why we consider also not only to bring the information of the agricultural sector, but also the healthcare sector, that you will have some more information with the videos you already have from the technical point of view, but also with the participation of doctor from the oncology center here with us in the room, because these two sectors are very close related to the well-being of the Cuban population. Often you will see in each of the speeches that you have been listening yesterday and today that there are common effects of the blockade, and that is precisely what we consider important to summarize, because the effects of the blockade are in the daily life of the Cuban people. Every move that we do, there is an impact of the blockade. Either if we go to the market, either if we don't find the specific products we need for people that are in need of specific products, like those who are sick or have cancer, or if you try to get to the doctor or to your workplace to as a farmer, people find difficulties in order to move from one place to the other. So everything that, all the things that we have been mentioning are very well interconnected. We are only mentioning in different moments so as to give more details of those sectors. But the truth is that we are talking about a specific set of laws that it is affecting in a horizontal way all the sectors of Cuba. So thank you, Suzanne, and I give you the word again to you.
Thank you, Lema. Thank you for making the video available to us, number one, and thank you for your additional comments. I think they were very helpful in kind of reminding us as to the depth of the blockade and the ways that the different sectors are, or the different impacts are interrelated. So I am going to move now to showing videos of prepared comments from our comrades in the health sector. And the first video I'm going to play is from Dr. Mariuska Forteza Saiz. She is head of the Oncopediatric Service National Institute of Oncology and Radiobiology, pediatric oncophysician, and research assistant and professor, and a member of the National Institute of Oncology and Radiobiology in Havana, Cuba. And okay, just one moment.
Mi nombre es Mariuska Forteza.
My name is Mariuska Forteza Saiz. I'm a pediatric oncology specialist in the Institute of Oncology in Havana. I'm part of the Pediatric Oncology Service, where I am currently the head of the service. Our ward is made up of a group of doctors, including 3 pediatricians and 4 pediatric oncologists. We have a ward where we have an isolation area where we give care to critically ill patients due to the complications from their treatment. It includes 4 beds. We also have 16 remaining beds for hospitalization where patients receive treatment. We treat patients that have a diagnosis of solid and hematological tumors, including lymphomas from all of the country. We are the National Reference Center, and therefore all difficult cases for diagnosis or that require a second opinion or intensive treatment are seen at our institute. The incidence of pediatric cancer in Cuba is around 450 cases per year. Among these, several areas of care are affected by the blockade, including the diagnosis of many of the main diseases. There's a significant incidence of neuroblastomas whose diagnosis is impacted by the blockade, given that neuroblastomas require, in order to do proper studies and adequate treatment, chromosomic treatments such as NMIC gene amplification and MIBG scans, both are necessary and they're affected by the blockade. We cannot perform these studies. What does this mean? Well, it affects the choice of therapy because we can't adequately classify or stage the situation. Then when we have to provide the treatment, it may be inadequate. Often we have to use treatment regimens that are higher risk, which leads to greater toxicity. Another important impact is in the treatment of osteosarcomas. Patients diagnosed with this, their first line of treatment is high-dose methotrexate. Unfortunately, although our country has the equipment to apply this treatment, we can't do it because we don't have the means to calculate the plasma levels of methotrexate. Despite having the equipment, it prevents us from acquiring the reagents needed for that. Of course, since we can't use methotrexate at high doses, we had to adjust our protocols and use it at lower doses, which of course doesn't have the same response to treatment and ultimately affects the overall survival rate of these patients. In our country, patients that are diagnosed with central nervous system tumors, where the first line of treatment for several of them, especially medulloblastomas, need nitrous ureas, specifically
and agents of the Cuban government, as if we could not think for ourselves. Subsequently, groups were infiltrated by government agents. Ours, in particular, was an undercover sheriff from New Orleans who lied in testimony before the subcommittee of the House Committee on Internal Security that prior leaving for Cuba, one had to endure 3.5 months of twice a week indoctrination sessions, and that upon arrival in Cuba, we had been put into labor camps, working 5.5 days, 44 hours a week, with more indoctrination of, quote, leftist principles, and that we all had to be confirmed as Marxist-Leninists. The agent's lying testimony said that brigade members were ordered to develop propaganda for us to return to the United States in support of the Cuban Revolution and furtherance of the cause of communism within the United States. Secret infiltrations by agents and the United States government's use of domestic surveillance have continued over the past 40 years, revealing how U.S. intelligence agencies have engaged in controversial covert actions against U.S. citizens traveling to Cuba. In 2014, the United States government financed a 4-year effort to promote Cuba's rap music scene as part of an effort to promote, quote, democracy. They monitored the political activities of hip-hop groups where the U.S. Aid for International Development secretly tried to infiltrate Cuba's underground hip-hop movement. As young rappers from the U.S. developed relationships with young Cuban rappers, millions of dollars were funneled into Cuba in efforts to build a network of young Cuban artists who would spark, quote, a youth movement against the Cuban government. That operation followed a familiar pattern to other tactics in America's secret war in Cuba. It was profoundly unsuccessful, it was amateurish, and it failed. The U.S. government's monitoring of U.S. citizens and organizations have also attempted to chill many groups' efforts of providing humanitarian aid to Cuba as a result of the economic blockade. For more than 5 decades, the Interreligious Foundation for Community Organizations, or IFCO, founded by the late Reverend Lucius Walker, whose proud history is marked as the first national foundation conceived of and run by people of color, has acted as a bridge between predominantly mainline churches and community groups, and as a broker for channeling of interdenominational support, and as a resource bank supporting the work of congregations and organizations engaged in the work of community building. Our organization has been a catalyst and a conscience in the movement for social justice, and where the United States government has acted in our name in matters that are oppressive to people around the world, which violates human rights and the sanctity of life, we work with others by offering concerned U.S. citizens an opportunity to demonstrate and enact an alternative people-to-people foreign policy based in justice and mutual respect. A primary example has been our more than 30 years of people-to-people exchanges with our blockaded neighbor, the island nation of Cuba. 2 of our signature projects are the IFCO Pastors for Peace Caravan and the IFCO Latin American School of Medicine Elam Medical School Program, which has graduated, thanks to the generosity of the Cuban government and its people, more than 200 U.S. doctors who are applying their life-saving skills as medical professionals on the front line in the disparate health communities right here in the United States of America. Between 1988 and 1992, Pastors for Peace successfully organized dozens of caravans of humanitarian aid to Nicaragua, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Chiapas, Mexico. Since 1992, IFCO Pastors for Peace has organized 32 friendship caravans to Cuba as challenges to the U.S. government's economic blockade. These caravans have taken valuable humanitarian aid to Cuba, but more importantly, have helped demonstrate to the Cuban people that they are not alone and they have allies even in the belly of the beast in the United States. In this context, we have been witness in contrasting examples of the false propaganda narrative that is exploited in the public sphere by hostile elements, including the corporate media and leaders in our own country, over the assertion of Cuba's human rights violation against its own populace, where they say denied democratic freedoms, that Cuba denies the right of free speech, assembly, the lack of mass political participation in decision-making on the island, and allegations regarding the freedom of religion. Fact. We successfully resisted the Bush's administration attempt to fully criminalize travel to Cuba. Our friendship caravans have also played an important role in making dents in the blockade. In 1993, when the U.S. Customs at the Mexican border attempted to seize material aid collected from the people in the U.S., destined for our Cuban sisters and brothers, led by Reverend Walker and other Carabinistas, we went on a hunger strike until the buses and the medicines and the other supplies were released. Our work was part of the backdrop to the Obama administration's partial normalization of relations with Cuba. Now we are active resisting the retightening of the blockade as imposed by Trump, which the Biden administration has so far continued. We are involved in the campaign to remove Cuba from the list of state sponsors of terrorists, and in a few weeks, we will be 50 strong in the continual fight against the inhumane, the illegal blockade by arriving in Santiago de Cuba with our 33rd Friendship Caravan, where we will celebrate with the Cuban people the 70th anniversary of the attack on the Moncada, the beginning of the Cuban Revolution. And we have a little video we want to close out with.
In the gateway city. Get ready for 110.
You're not going to confiscate anything.
We're not going to steal anything, sir.
Are you going to confiscate anything?
Sure.
We're not going to take this truck in here until you confirm that you're not going to confiscate our medicine. Apparently they want to make it difficult on us. It would be a lot easier for us to be able to take this truck in, for customs to give us some kind of a guarantee that they're not going to confiscate our precious medicines that are destined for churches in Cuba. They won't give us that guarantee. We're going to take the semi back to the lot, and we're going to unload everything by hand and carry it across. All right!
We'll carry 667 pounds each, which is 100 tons. Yeah. We're prepared to do that. And if they want to make us sweat, like my man here said, we're going to sweat all day. But we're going to break the blockade.
You just broke it! It's broken! Medicina para Cuba y soplar para Cuba. Y mucho amor y mucho corazón hacia Cuba.
And putting so much hard work and effort into this, and seeing our dreams or hopes, you realize it's just an incredible sensation that can't even begin to describe.
Thank you so much. Viva Cuba Libre.
Your testimony, Dr. Mealy, and for that powerful video on the importance of material solidarity with the Cuban people. My name is Mateo Feliciano Almonte, and I am a member of the steering committee of this International People's Tribunal on U.S. imperialism. And I want to, again, thank our witnesses for their insightful testimonies on the impacts of the blockade and other imperialist measures on the various sectors of Cuban economy and society. We are going to now transition to our Q&A portion of the program, where our jurors are able to ask questions of our witnesses. For the sake of time, I won't be providing the full biographies and backgrounds of our jurors, but I do encourage you to visit our website at sanctionstribunal.org to learn more about them. Our jurors today include Marjorie Cohn, Ivan Anopoulos, Michael Deutsch, and Mohammed Tay. And as we did yesterday, I will call on each juror to determine if you have any questions. If you don't, that's fine. But first, we'll start with a question from one of our steering committee members, Navid Farnia, who is wondering about the particular problems that Cuba faced after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And what did the Cuban state do to endure and survive after this special period? And any of our witnesses can step forward to address this question. So who would like to do so? Would anyone like to step forward and address this question? I can also restate the question.
Yes, from Cuba, we can have some words. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I will pass the microphone to Professor Yamina to explain some details. She will speak in Spanish.
I thank to be able to be here with you in these activities. I can't hear her very well. Obviously, after the fall of the Soviet Union, it was clear that things began to be more difficult. It was another difficulty. Oh, sorry, it's really difficult to hear her. The most important thing is that the blockade is economic and commercial. The lists of exclusions of Cuba to access of technology grew. The fight from the perspective of the aggression in the community sector also increased. The impact of the extraterritorial dimension of the blockade increased. From the perspective of the legal aspects, that also was subject to new clauses or specific statutes that were partially approved. And then there was an exclusion of intentionality so that Cuba couldn't access high technology. with regards to the possibility with their own economic development, it left the country on a very precarious situation. Muchísimas gracias. ¿Habrá algún otro testigo que quiera añadir algo a la pregunta?
Okay, well then we will move to our jurors then. Let's start with Marjorie Cohn. If you have any questions, the floor is yours.
It's me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Sí, muchas gracias por todos sus discursos tan informativos y fuertes. What are some of the Cuban medical and other techniques that people in the United States are prevented from accessing due to the U.S. blockade?
So which specific techniques from which sector? In general, you mentioned? Can you hear us from Cuba? Hi. Yes, I will pass the floor to Doctor from the Oncology Center to explain about the what are those techniques, specifically in the healthcare sector, that the U.S. People are not able to have access due to the blockade.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to participate in this very important aim. I will talk about one specific technique. For uterus cancer, we use radiotherapy, brachytherapy. We have 4 specific places in the country for this therapy. We had 4 machines from an European enterprise. In one moment, one American enterprise bought the European enterprise, and 1 week after we received the note, we could not continue to send to you the necessary radioactive sources for the functioning of this machine. For that reason, a few weeks after, we need to stop the therapy and start to look another machines to use one of previous planned money, change the design of the places where we place the machine and training the person. Finally, we restart about 5 months after the therapy. But for that reason, about 250 patients could not receive the best therapy at the exactly time. And well, they suffered the embargo's problem, and the results of this therapy were not the best. In my previous presentation, I talked about some original Cuban products useful in cancer immunotherapy. cancer vaccines, bioimmunity, and specific immunomodulator, heberferon, another immunomodulator. And for this reason, some American patients will not receive the benefit of our product. I want to say that we have organized an international congress next September in parallel which talking about all these useful Cuban biotechnological products for cancer therapy. Maybe the some of American researchers will stay with us in the congress. For example, heberferon is a very useful product for skin cancer therapy. The National Cancer Comprehensive Network said that they could not use interferons because two non-scientific reasons. One, the very high cost, and the other reason is that it's very difficult to patients to be receiving 3 times a week the therapy. Well, our products have better results than others in the world with very low cost and very low adverse events. And the product may be administered near the house of the patient. May be interesting for American patients to receive this product. Thank you. Yes, for example, this is not for cancer, but Lyme disease is increasing in the south of the USA. This is a disease transmitted by the ticks from the cattle seeds. Well, here we have developed a product called Gavac that stops the infestation of the cattle with the tick that may be useful to control the Lyme disease. Well, may be useful if in USA you could use this product. Maybe many others possibilities to collaborate with USA scientific. For example, we have a very long experience designing and conducting clinical trials in cancer. Well, when we have participated with foreign enterprises, not American, mainly from Europe, our information would not be used in USA. Even if our scientific information may be obtained with all the necessary requirements, but is one consequence of the environment.
Thank you, Doctor, for your response. Okay, so now we can move to Michael Deutsch. If you have any questions, the floor is yours. Okay, actually, he may not be in attendance currently. Why don't we move to Ava Nanopoulos? If you have any questions, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, everyone. I was really very taken by the many stories that were conveyed today, in particularly in making clear that that despite such a long blockade, there are alternatives actually to economic asphyxiation. There is an alternative to capitalist expansion, and Cuban people, even under those conditions, through their creativity, we heard about the alternative medicines and treatments and farming methods, have sought really to sort of stand together and combat US imperialism. I think it's an example for all of us, and I'll be generally quite keen to hear more about any of the aspects in which the blockade has led to sort of these alternative ways of being within the capitalist imperialist economy. But more specifically, also, I had a question for Rosemary, I think. Rosemary, thank you so much again for showing us all the sort of efforts that are being done to stand with the Cuban people, including within the US. You did mention that you were successful in some of your initiatives, most notably in criminalizing, in preventing the criminalization of travel. But in terms of trying to think about the extraterritorial effects of sanctions that perhaps we don't always see as related directly to the blockade, can you give us a little bit more examples of some of the restrictions that have been put in place so that you have experienced were trying to offer either concrete material support or to challenge the ideological narrative put forward in the US in relation to the sanctions, some of the obstacles you have faced? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question, sister. Well, first, I would like to say that, number one, our organization initially refused to, prior to COVID, IFCO Pastors for Peace refused to adhere to applying for a license to travel to Cuba. So we would go through a third country. We would go through Mexico. But then what happened, that extraterritorial entrapment, which I called, started impacting the country of Mexico. So then we were then required to show identification and what have you. So we just decided that, okay, we're going to continue to carry under the one of the 12 categories of being religious interaction. We have our partners in Cuba is the Martin Luther King Center. And so to overcome that obstacle, we continue to travel around the United States in our caravans, and we collect material aid, medicines and what have you. And we work with other organizations who do have licensing to transport medicine, and we work with them. But we also then we still travel to Cuba through the U.S., and we take these donations that we gather when we go around the country doing this period right now, gathering materials. I think it's more of a consciousness that we try to instill within the people who travel with us, their commitment to returning to the United States and becoming ambassadors, in a sense, for peace. And carrying that information, we ask people to commit themselves that when they return to come back to the United States. Many of those individuals who have traveled with us then become engaged in pushing for even albeit maybe symbolic legislation in local municipalities to pass resolutions calling for an end to the inhumane blockade. So people returned, hundreds of people returned to the United States and began to challenge their congressional people, calling on them to support ending the blockade. But I must say also that our organization has also had some defeat. The U.S. Treasury Department removed our license, our 501c3, a couple of years ago. That had a lot to do supposedly with our work around Cuba, but also our work around Palestine. But over the years, we struggled, and through mass support, our license was, we have it back now as a nonprofit organization. But we are very clear politically that we are in opposition to the blockade, and we have no, we openly do that. We openly do that. We don't try to hide going. We don't try to hide that we're going to go under a category that we may not want to. We think that it might be easier, but we are very open about our work. And of course, a lot of that has come from our late Reverend Lucius Walker, who basically led the way that this blockade is illegal, it's inhumane, and that we have to take a voice and we have to challenge it. So that has been our philosophy and the guiding principles of how we do our work.
Just sorry, if I can just follow up, would you generally say, however, that from the perspective of the US government, what's happening is not just an asphyxiation of Cuba, but also an attempt to asphyxiate any form of support from the grassroots.
Quickly, I know that there are other people who may want to speak.
Such as preventing people like yourself and organizations like yourself from
I couldn't hear all of your question, but yes, it is an attempt to stifle people-to-people relationships. I agree. Yes, over the past 60 years, that has always been the attempt to try to silence us. And so that's why those covert activities, when groups, yesterday we talked about how the more recent youth groups who are returning from May Day, some of the same tactics that they used 60 years ago, putting people on the side, asking, this is at customs, asking questions, attempting to take away basic paraphernalia that you may be bringing back, like a flyer or a leaflet. But all of that is being done to stifle the ability of people to return to this country to organize. And I think that over the years, we're seeing more youth who are challenging this. And the target now the government is appearing to target the youth that are traveling to Cuba. And so I think that the rally that's coming up on the 25th of June will again, in Washington, will again demonstrate the momentum that exists right now in terms of solidarity for Cuba. So yes, I wholeheartedly, since 60 years, there has been an attempt to block this people-to-people relationship.
Thank you very much, Dr. Milley, for your response, and Ava for your question as well. So now we can move to Mohammed Tay. If you have any questions for the witnesses, the floor is yours. Okay. Why don't we move to Victor Good? If you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
I think he had, he's back. Great.
Victor, can you hear us? Do you have any questions for the witnesses at the moment? Okay. Well, I guess we can do another quick circle around. Marjorie or any of the other jurors, if there are any additional questions, the floor is yours. Please feel free. Okay. Well, in lieu of that, we will go ahead and conclude this hearing. Again, I want to thank our jurors for this Q&A portion. I want to thank our witnesses, all of our audience around the world. Thank you for your patience and bearing with us through technical difficulties, which again are emblematic of hardships imposed upon the Cuban people and the impact that this has on our ability to engage in important discussions like this. But we will reconvene next Saturday. Excuse me. We will reconvene next Saturday at the same time at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for our hearing on the impacts of U.S. colonialism and imperialism in Puerto Rico. And we look forward to seeing you all then. It looks like our comrades at ICAP actually would like to make some final comments, so please feel free to do so.
Hi, can we say some words from Cuba?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so I would like to thank to the organizers, to the interpreters, to the technicians, because we know that to organize this kind of events is very hard and it's very complicated. And thank you, because some of the technical situations and due to the blockade, we were not able to use a better platform that it is for these kinds of panels and tribunals. This is another of the situations of not being able to use the proper technological platforms. On behalf of the Cuban Institute of Friendship with the People, we would like to thank specifically the National Lawyers Guild, because it is very important to highlight all the legal aspects of the blockade, as it is precisely through laws, resolutions, and other types of legal actions that for more than 60 years they have trying to impose specific damages towards Cuba. They have diversified those laws during the past of the 64 years of revolution, and it is very important to highlight and to make others know about this situation. We would like to have some final comments, not only on the presentations, but also into the questions that our friends have and the jury has presented. I have to mention that another of the characteristics of these laws and these resolutions that have been imposed toward Cuba have the aim to paralyze our society. And in that sense, it is to put at the limit our own capacities. And very often in the media, in the conversations, we listen to people mentioning all the things that Cuba has not been able to achieve. And that is true. But we have to have in mind that we have on our shoulders, we have the burden of being watched and being suffocated and asphyxiated from the economic point of view, that it is horizontal and transversal to all the sectors of the Cuban economy. It is true that we need to improve our internal mechanism to get the development that all Cubans deserve. That is true. But it is also true that to do that, it is important to have access to the world markets. It is important to have access to the banks so as to do transactions with other countries. It is also true that people need to come to Cuba so as Cuba being able to develop the touristic sector, that it is one of those motors of the Cuban economy. And also, we wanted to thank to the subcommittee of Cuba inside the National Lawyers Guild, because for many years they have been advising and counseling to all those organizations, associations, travel agencies in the United States that have not stopped to come to Cuba, even though the travel bans were in place. And the caravan, Pastors for Peace, and the Venceremos Brigade that our dear Rosemary Neely was mentioning, it is part of those people in the United States that decided to confront those policies that were aimed to isolate the Cuban people. Also, we were speaking here about the need of sharing with you other details of what happened when the Soviet Union collapsed. Because, well, we are here, we are alive, and we are trying to develop the country, even though we lost an important amount of the resources we had to offer to the population. More than 30% of the GDP of Cuba was lost in only 2-3 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Not to mention the more than 80% of the trade that we had was specifically with that region, and we lost it in only a blink of an eye. Professor from the Oncology Center was also asking us to mention some specific damages that we had after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the socialist republics at that time. And more important, because it is true that we had a very difficult moment that Cuba put the name of a special period, but as we were mentioning yesterday, we were also at war. And in this case, during those years, we were trying to survive and to keep the sustainability of our society and to keep our population alive. But Professor have some other comments to express all the difficulties that we had to go through until the moment we are now.
The same. Well, at that moment, it was necessary to change many things. First, we look how to use better our very few resources. The government pressed the development of biotechnology industry. And since that moment, we start to produce generics and original products to use when we have not the possibility to import. For example, since that time, our biotechnological and pharmaceutical entity produce about 80% of the necessary product for cancer therapy. One of the most expensive part of the production is to clean the plant when you change from one product to other. Well, for that reason, we have developed one original method to clean based in ozone use. It was patented and it was one way to reduce the cost of production. We start to develop our own new protocols of therapy using our resource and introducing the resource and the necessary techniques from other countries, or we start to produce and develop our own machines. It was a very difficult period, but we start to work hard, and we could obtain near the best results in cancer management.
So, taking advantage of the presence of Professor here, I want to take this moment also to congratulate our medical doctors, nurses, and health professionals in Cuba, because even though the economic situation in Cuba has lived very difficult moments, the truth is that no hospital in Cuba was closed, no other doctor's appointments were canceled just because the economic situations were not in favor of a normal situation in Cuba. And it is also important to mention that not only the medical services in Cuba were not stopped, but Cuba didn't stop the collaboration with other countries all around the world in different regions. Even in the most difficult times, Cuba was there present to share what we have. That is our principle, to share what we have, even though we have difficult moments. That is what friends do, to share in all times what we have. And talking about friends, and finally, I would like to thank all those friends in the United States and other regions that are now following this tribunal that for many years have been in solidarity with Cuba, making easier the life of the Cubans, bringing material aid, sending containers to Cuba. Just recently, during the pandemic, we received millions of syringes from the Solidarity Movement to help the medical sector in Cuba to undergo the vaccination of all the Cuban population. So thank you, the National Lawyers Guild, and thanks the panelists that have shared this time with us.
Thank you so much for your additional comments. And again, we do want to thank all of our witnesses over the past 2 days. Organizations like IFCO, Pastors for Peace, the National Network on Cuba, the Black Alliance for Peace, the National Lawyers Guild, all of our partner organizations who've had a hand in putting this hearing together. Thank you very much. And all of our audience and attendees. Again, we will reconvene next Saturday. We do encourage you to attend our country hearing on the impacts of U.S. imperialism in Puerto Rico. And so thank you again, everyone, and we will see you then. Thanks so much.